Good morning. This is the macroeconomic outlook. So I'll be taking you through the performance of Irish agriculture. Good morning. This is the macroeconomic outlook. So I'll be taking you through how the macroeconomy has performed in 2021 and taking a look ahead to 2022. So we're going to begin with a look at the world economy in 2021. So in the world economy in 2021, we've seen a situation where there's been uneven global economic recovery. We've seen that the struggle with COVID has continued, particularly in developing countries where the vaccination program has not developed to the same extent as it has in developed countries. So we see developed economies recovering from COVID to a greater extent than developing economies. And when we look at developed economies, we see that the US has fared better than the European Union in terms of growth rates in 2021. We've seen a rapid recovery in demand for industrial commodities in 2021, reflecting the gradual easing of some of the restrictions that hindered economic activity. We've seen also a very sharp rise in energy prices, as admittedly from low levels, but the extent of the increase has taken some people by surprise. We've seen bottlenecks in the global supply chain, COVID having an impact on production capacity in some parts of the world. And we've seen high international freight costs as well, reflecting some of the logistical problems that exist in terms of global supply chains at present. And we've also seen, as a result of all this, inflationary pressures throughout the economy. If we look first at that Brent crude oil price, what you can see here on the chart is the extent of the increase that has taken place over the last year or so, a very strong increase in oil prices right through 2021. So if we look for the year as a whole, the Brent crude price will be about $71, we reckon. So that will be an increase of about 69% on the average figure for 2020. And if we look at the spot price for the month of November, that was around $81. Prices have eased a little bit in the last few weeks. Our forecast for 2022 is for an oil price of about $79, and that would still represent about an 11% increase on the average price in 2021. We've seen a huge increase in the price of natural gas in Europe, and this has got a lot of attention recently because of the effect it has also had on the price of fertilizer. We've seen that Europe has become increasingly import dependent in terms of its gas needs. We've seen that there were low stocks of gas in Europe after a cold winter in 2021. We've seen a limited supply of gas coming into Europe from Russia over the summer period when gas usage would be lower and when gas stocks tend to be built up for this coming winter. And we've also seen lower imports of LNG into Europe. And all these factors together have led to this very sharp increase in the price of natural gas in Europe. And that has had implications for the cost of producing fertilizer. Nitrogen-based fertilizers are produced from natural gas. And as a result of that, we've seen a big escalation in fertilizer prices, and we've seen even some fertilizer plants going offline on the basis that they might not be able to sell fertilizer profitably at the very, very high prices that the current production costs entail. Now, if we look at exchange rates briefly, first at the exchange rate between the euro and the pound, we've seen that over the course of 2021, the euro has depreciated in value against the pound sterling. The spot price at the moment is around 85 pence to the euro. The average for the year 2021 is about 86 pence to the euro, and that represents a decrease in value over the 2020 level of about 3 pence against the euro. For 2022, we're sticking with the current exchange rate of about 85 pence to the euro. And this exchange rate is one that exporters from Ireland into the UK are generally more comfortable with. We've seen periods of time where that exchange rate has been closer to 90 pence and beyond, in fact, and that is something that exporters from Ireland don't particularly like, in the sense that it impacts on the competitiveness of Irish exports on the UK market. Looking at the exchange rate between the dollar and the euro, we've seen a kind of mixed story in 2021, where initially at least the euro appreciated against the US dollar, but as we got closer to the end of the year, we saw the value of the euro tailing off quite sharply. And at present, the euro is only worth about $1.13. For the year as a whole, 2021, the value of the euro against the dollar is around 1.18, which actually represents an appreciation versus the value in 2020. And for 2022, we're sticking with the current spot rate of 1.13. There are differing views as to what exactly would happen with that exchange rate. Turning now to the Irish economy in 2021, and it's a continuing tale of two economies to some extent, with the export-focused economy element of the economy doing very well, and parts of the economy that are more dependent on domestic consumption tending to struggle through some of the lockdowns that we have endured. Overall for the year, growth rates looking like they will exceed 10% in terms of GNP for Ireland. So that's quite a healthy growth rate, especially when you consider that there was positive growth in the Irish economy also in 2020, in contrast to a lot of other parts of the world. Unemployment rate has been very high in the early part of 2021 due to the big lockdown we had from January onwards. And at one stage we had about 500,000 people in receipt of the PUP payment. However, as we'll see in a later chart, the unemployment rate has dropped rapidly in Q3 and Q4 of 2021 and is now down to less than 8%. So for the year as a whole, unemployment would probably average around 16%, and employment has increased and surpassed the 2 million level in 2021, having been depressed in 2020. There will be a substantial government deficit. These figures are estimates from the ESRI made in October and will shortly be revised by the ESRI in their December quarterly economic commentary. But as of October, the ESRI was forecasting a deficit of about 15 billion in 2021, but tax receipts have been higher than expected, so that deficit may end up being smaller than is suggested here. I mentioned that some parts of the economy have been particularly badly affected, so areas like tourism, the arts, entertainment, personal services, they were all very badly affected by the lockdown situation. We talked in the previous slide there about there being inflationary pressures in the economy, and we've seen the rate of inflation increase to surpass 2% in 2021. Exports have been on the up, however, in 2021, and imports have actually declined. And just looking at that growth rate figure for Ireland here, we're looking at GNP, which is a better measure of economic activity than GDP, really, from the perspective of the Irish economy. For the other countries, we're looking at growth rates of GDP, and as you can see, Ireland's growth rate is exceeding that of other EU member states and in excess of that in the UK also. So for the EU as a whole, a growth rate in 2021 of about 4.1%, whereas the growth rate in Ireland looks set to be in excess of 10%. Just looking at those unemployment data, what we see here in the lower part of the chart is the normal unemployment rate, or the unemployment rate as it would normally be defined. And what we see here in this higher line here is all of the people who have additionally found themselves out of work and in receipt of the PUP payment. So what you can see here, and if we just focus on 2021, is we had a sharp increase in unemployment just at the turn of the year with the introduction of another lockdown. And at that point in the year, we had about 27% unemployment. But as I said earlier, that dropped over the course of the year and is now below the 8% mark. Looking to 2022, growth rates in Ireland will be, in terms of GNP, forecast by the ESRI to be about 6.1%, which still is in excess of the growth rates that are projected for the other economies shown here on the chart. The EU forecast to have a growth rate of about 4.5%. And finally, just to summarise in respect of the Irish economy in 2022, and a word of caution here, I guess, in the sense that prospects are still conditional on what happens in respect of the COVID-19 situation, and at the current point there is a bit of uncertainty in respect of new variants, so that's just something to keep in mind. The underlying fundamentals of the Irish economy, the ESRI feels remain robust, and the ESRI is calling for that GNP growth rate of about 6.1% in 2022, with a further fall in the unemployment rate to average less than 7% in 2022, and unemployment to increase further back up towards the 2.3 million mark. So almost 300,000 additional people in work in 2022 compared to 2021. Further decline in government deficit to take place in 2022, slower inflation rate in 2022 compared to 2021, and a further increase in both exports and imports also forecast for 2022. And that's it. So thank you for your attention.